This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the latest edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey and Brian Tripp with you here on this Thursday, getting you set for maybe not a big Week 6 trip, because speaking of big, we got a big Week 7 coming up here in the conference next weekend. So this is, I guess we can call it the appetizer to that big October 12th date we have here coming up. So we got a nice little appetizer here in Week 6 with some interesting, maybe not eye-popping matchups that we obviously will get you set for here on the pod.
We've reached the point of the college football season where conference races, the college football playoff race, is starting to take shape. And everyone has those dates circled on their calendar. You know, those dates that you don't want to schedule a fall wedding on. You have those dates on your calendar. Next weekend is certainly one of them in the college football landscape. There's another one November 2nd, but October 12th next weekend is absolutely one of those dates.
Oregon, Ohio State, USC, Penn State, just alone in the Big Ten, along with some other ones and other conferences that are huge.
Yep.
Yeah. You cancel your plans next weekend, lock yourself at home, and just have a full 12-hour veg sesh watching these big games here. But in order to get there, right, we got to set the table this week, have some interesting matchups we'll discuss.
I have a question for you. Has it already been negotiated? I don't think there's a ring yet, but has it been negotiated that when you get married to your longtime girlfriend, fall weddings are off the table? Like, it can't be a fall wedding.
Well, we've had a discussion, let's just say, and she's a big proponent and fan of a September wedding. So let's just say, yes, the ring is not been slipped on the finger yet, and maybe there's a holdup of, well, let's just make sure that those fall weddings are clear, because I will not be at a wedding reception as some big games are going on and watching it on my phone. So it's been a point of contention, we'll say. Yes.
There's nothing worse.
Nothing. I watched some. It is. I agree. It is very selfish.
I've been in a pew with the phone like placed on top of the Bible in the back of a pew before watching a close college football game. And then, you're at the reception, you want to have a good time, but all the boys are huddled up around the table. Hey, what's going on in that last second of that Penn State Michigan game? What's going on in that Alabama Georgia game? What's going on between USC and Oregon? That's the last thing. Like, as a bride, you don't want all the boys, all the men huddled up around tables watching college football. So just avoid it.
You know what? That's a great argument. Lauren, why would you want people distracted in the corner watching the game when the attention should be on you? That's not going to happen in the summertime for a baseball game. You know what? I'm using that argument. You may have just saved what could be a very big time argument here in the Hickey household. That's huge.
And I see you already termed it the Hickey household. It's not, I know who the decorator is.
Well, as you can see in the background here, it is my girlfriend's apartment. She just allows me to live here. But since she's not here to argue, it's my household.
Just like for any programs not in the Big Ten and the SEC, it's their college football world, and everyone else is just living in it.
You are very right about that. Speaking of which, the two meeting of the minds is happening next weekend, reportedly. Big Ten and the SEC are going to have a big meeting here to kind of, is it fair to phrase the trip as to save college football?
Well, it depends. If you're a fan of the schools in those two teams, you may think it is to save college football. And I would also like to point out that we have an outline of where we want to go on the show. That was not a planned transition right there, but it really did work out perfectly. But the two conferences meeting in Nashville on October 10th, as you talked about, this is what the Big Ten SEC Advisory Group says they will discuss. Challenges in college football, including but not limited to recent court decisions, pending litigation, a patchwork of state laws, and complex governance proposals, compel the two conferences to take a leadership role in developing solutions for a sustainable future of college sports. A sustainable future in which it is governed and ruled by the Big Ten and the SEC. So, yeah, they want to save college sports as long as these two conferences are the ones controlling college sports. So, yeah, they can say all the right things, but where is it headed? It is headed to positioning both conferences for the inevitable future, to infinity and beyond, to control everything, that there has to do. And it may say college sports, but let's face it, it's to control college football, which is where all the money is in college sports. And it's to position these two conferences to maximize the amount of teams that they can get into the playoff and maximize television revenue, which is going to include not an equal split between the Power Four conferences when it comes to that TV contract with ESPN for the college football playoff, but it's going to be tilted in those two conferences' favor. So no, the only way that you'll continue to have college sports is if the Big Ten and the SEC get their way. So yes, I guess they are saving college sports in a sense, because if they don't get their way, you'll end up with 36 teams competing in what would be a pseudo professional league. So yeah, they're saving college sports, but only on their terms.
You're right about that. And they can dress it up as, oh, we're going to discuss, court proceedings and state laws and make sure everybody's on the same page. The two biggest takeaways that at least we believe will come out of this meeting, one of them is, like you said, college football playoff berths. And that made a lot of news this week because, at least reportedly, the Big Ten and the SEC are looking to get automatic qualifiers each and every year into a college football playoff. Will looks to be maybe 14 teams. And if it is expanded from 12 to 14, the number being floated out there is 4. 4 every single year from the Big Ten, 4 every single year from the SEC, bare minimum, automatically into the college football playoff just based on your standing trip. I'm curious your thoughts here. If it does go to 14 teams, which right now, at least the college football playoff format of 12, it's only under contract for 2 years, 2024 and 2025. After that, right now, there is nothing in terms of what the playoff could look like. So if it does go to 14, and the Big Ten and SEC get their way where every single year they have 4 auto bids from each conference going in. Is that a good thing for college football, you think? Is that fair?
And there's someone out there saying, wait, hold up. ESPN just signed a deal for the college football playoff through 2032. Well, yeah, there's 3 players at the table here. The Big Ten, the SEC, and ESPN, which also holds the rights to the SEC conference and their college football package. So, and their media rights deals for television. So that contract the format can change after the next 2 years. The 4 auto bids would benefit those two conferences if they do initiate a scheduling partnership that has been also discussed that would protect those leagues from having teams with multiple losses and provide a greater competitive schedule during the regular season, knowing that, hey, you can have a USC going to take on LSU in Baton Rouge. You can have Alabama making a trip to the Big House to take on Michigan. You can have those big cross-conference clashes, say that 5 times fast, without it being a detriment to the playoff positioning of those leagues. Right now the group of 5 gets an automatic berth, the Big 12 gets an automatic berth, and the ACC gets an automatic berth. Not only would it be to have auto bids for those leagues, but to guarantee the league champions of the SEC and the Big Ten, even if it's a 1-2 loss team, and maybe even the top 2 teams in that league, guarantee that they are receiving the highest seeds then as well in the college football playoff, and saying like, hey, ACC, Big 12, Clemson, 12-0, great. Here, you can participate, but you don't get rewarded for what you did throughout the season. This is our playoff. You're kind of just a guest in it. Good luck. You're not going to have any chance to win the football games.
That's I hate it. I think it's awful, and I hope it does not happen because you're taking away, in part, what makes college football so special. It is a 12-game season. It is a sprint from the start, and we've talked about, I think subjectivity, while it is maddening at times, and part of the reason why they want to have these 4 auto bids is to take away power from the College Football Playoff Committee, which I'm not against that general premise. But what you're doing is you're taking away the resume. You're taking away basically the point of who you play and having a challenging schedule, because now it's not, oh, are you 10-2 and who'd you beat and who'd you lose to? Now it's just, well, you got 9 wins. Are you a top 4 team in the Big Ten? Doesn't matter how you get there. Doesn't matter what schedule looks like.
On Monday, we talked about the value of the regular season still being there. I think this would devalue the regular season. And what's always made college football great is, and sure, you can still have a Cinderella team like an Indiana or a Rutgers we may have this year in the Big Ten, but the Boise State story, right? To go to the Fiesta Bowl and beat Oklahoma on the hook and ladder, and the proposal at the end of the game, the NIU beating Notre Dame this year. There are UCF and their claim of a national championship on an undefeated season. College football is about those unique stories, and I think this would curtail. I'm not saying completely eliminate, because there's still those stories that could take place, but I think it would curtail those stories for any programs outside of the Big Ten or the SEC. You know, a school like Pitt making a run, anything like that. Those teams would be the ones that are impacted by it the most.
Right. And that's, I mean, just to kind of shutter the rest of college football, I think is ridiculous. Like, you look at right now what Clemson's doing in the ACC. They got stomped by Georgia, but now all of a sudden they're getting hot and playing some good football. Mm-hmm. Well, they could be left, if they don't win the ACC in this new format, let's say, they could be left out, not because they didn't earn it or their resume's not good enough, but because you have so many teams in the Big Ten and the SEC guaranteed to be in. You could be looking at, let's just say, possibly a 10-2 Clemson team here out, but a team like Rutgers in. And you look at Rutgers' schedule. We've talked about them right now being undefeated, and they've played well. But the reality is, part of the reason why we're talking about Rutgers, and even to a point Indiana, is because their schedules do not compare to other schools like Ohio State, for example. Ohio State, outside of them, is playing the top 5 teams in the Big Ten this year, starting this week with Iowa. Rutgers, their toughest game this season, you could argue, is at USC. Mm-hmm. Like, and you could get into the playoff, not because you're one of the truly the best 12, 14 teams in the country, but because you got a scheduling break, able to beat a bunch of average teams. Maybe you win a game or two you shouldn't, but now you're in the playoff again, just because you got a scheduling break. That to me is now what college football is about. And that's like to take away to take away the incentive to schedule difficult games, to take away the penalty of losing a game you shouldn't. And even in a way, you take away the reward of beating a team you shouldn't, because now every win is the same, every loss is the same. It's all just about standings in your respective conference. I think that's awful for all of college football. And I don't think, like you said, I think it does water down the regular season.
But that's what we've had in college football forever. That is in a 4-team playoff, undefeated ACC champion Florida State not getting the opportunity to compete for a national championship. That is in a 12-team playoff, the ACC positioning this year to only get one team in, either Miami or Clemson. Even if Clemson runs the table the rest of the way, if they don't win the ACC championship, in all likelihood, if you look at the current rankings, if things continue to break their way, they could be another team like that on the outside looking in. That's what college football has always been. In the BCS, it was that way. At least we had a formula to try to figure out how you're going to position yourself. Why didn't, I was just on the sidelines last week at the Penn State-Illinois game. Penn State's 1994 undefeated team was there that had arguably the best offense in Penn State history, if not one of the best offenses, with Kerry Collins, Kajana Carter, that whole team in college football history. They didn't win a national championship because they didn't get the right to play for it. This is how college football has always been. So this would just be the modern spin on it. And we're going to say, hey, 12 teams, 14 teams, now everyone's got a chance. But truly, the Big Ten and SEC just have an opportunity.
And at least at least for the college football playoff, even when it was a 14, nothing was automatic. Sure, the SEC champion was in, and most likely, most years, the Big Ten champion was in. It was unofficial, right?
Not in 2016.
Well, you're right about that, and a few others as well. But it's just while maybe nothing, I think in any 12-team, 14-team, it's assumed the Big Ten and the SEC will take up a majority of those teams anyway, right? Mm-hmm. I just don't love the fact that now it's automatic, because every year is different. Some years you may have in 4th place in the Big Ten in 8 and 14. That is, I don't know, or 7 and 3 in conference or something. You may just have it could be a down year for the conference. We've seen the Big Ten have a down year. We've seen the SEC have a down year. I just don't love the fact that you are now not accounting for those two conferences having a down year, maybe the Big 12 or the ACC having a better year than expected, and there's 2 or 3 teams now instead of just one that are, wow, they're some of the best teams in the country, and we could be talking about one of those teams being left out, not because they didn't deserve it, not because they didn't have the resume to get in, but because, well, we signed this agreement and the 4th team in the Big 10 and the 4th team in the ACC guaranteed to be in, so we got to put them in. Sorry, Oklahoma State, sorry, Boise State, sorry, whoever, but you got kicked out not because you didn't, do the work on the field, but because we signed a contract. I hate that. I think that takes away everything that makes college football special.
That's why the College Sports Tomorrow organization is proposing a 72-team Super League made up of mostly Power 4 conference teams, Ryan, to try to solve the issue themselves. Now, we've seen this from different organizations and groups with former administrators from college sports through the years proposing, how do we fix college athletics? And truly, this is a cool proposal. It's fun for us to talk about. It's fun for fans. And it's cool for us to debate, like, is this a better way to go? Does this have any merit and any opportunity of succeeding? Absolutely not, because there's not the money behind it. The Big Ten and the SEC have way too much power, and so does Fox and ESPN, which are the two organizations and media outlets that are directly correlated with each of those leagues. But a 72-team Super League with geographic NFL, with geographic conferences and divisions, maybe this would be, to officially designate college football as the minor leagues. Is this the way you can save the sport?
I would say so. Like, if you think about it on paper for a second, doesn't that make the most sense? Like, right now in college football, we have 134 teams in Division I FBS competing, in theory, all for a national title. But we both know Alabama, Ohio State, they're on a different playing field than Kent State and Akron. But yet, they're in the same league. Like, could you imagine if the Phillies and the Iron Pigs, they're still around, right? Like, no one's saying, oh, the Iron Pigs now, you have to go win a World Series. Like, you are now in the major leagues and that's what you're competing for. You're in totally different worlds. Your budgets are totally different. Everything you do operational wise couldn't be more different. Yet for some reason, they're all under the same umbrella and technically all in one giant league. It makes no sense. I think the idea on the surface of separating essentially the Power 4, plus we'll show you a graphic here in terms of what they're trying to separate here. Basically, the top 72 teams in terms of success, in terms of budget, resources, everything, they're in one league with one set of rules. And essentially the group of 5 is in another. I think that benefits everybody. I think that is a good thing.
All that is the FBS A and the FBS B, and then the F. It's just adding another division to come. Right. It's completely reshaping the sport in that you don't have conferences. You have divisions based on geographical location. And I'm surprised you didn't use the Binghamton Rumble Ponies in your example.
I will say the Iron Pigs is one of those names that stands out. I love the name.
The Rubber Ducks.
I'll give love to it.
There's a lot of them.
I mean, there's some great ones here.
Show. I know for our audience that's listening on the podcast. So Power 12, if you're on our YouTube page, you can see this. But 72 schools, formerly the Power 5. You'd have, for example, let's pull one here. Great Lakes, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Michigan State, Northwestern, and Purdue. In the Mideast, Cincinnati, Penn State, Pittsburgh, Rutgers, Syracuse, West Virginia. For our big audience on the West Coast, the Southwest, Arizona, Arizona State, Cal, Stanford, UCLA, USC. Like, yeah, this makes more sense. There would be 13 games over 15 weekends, 5 division games and non-divisional games, 8 non-divisional games. And it's based on geographic proximity, historic rivalries, in-state rivalries, and a 100-year look-back frequency of matchup. In theory, it sounds great. Does it have any chance? No. But I think it's a kind of cool proposal to at least look at and explore. When the NCAA disbands, maybe, just maybe, the Big Ten and the SEC will say, hey, let's invite everyone else, come play in our Super League.
You are right. It's going to take the NCAA going south first and foremost. But it's like, you look at this proposal, like, I think the foundation, the pillars, I guess I should say, like, I think the ideas are, I think that it's going back to what college football, I think, truly is about. Those regional rivalries now, like, that was partly what makes college football so special, because you're facing your in-state rival. You're facing, it's people turning on each other that you work with, that you grew up with. Now they go to state, you go to Tech, you play once a year. Like, I think those geographical rivalries, those, in-state rivalries, I think they do matter. So I like the idea that you split it up by geography. Now we see, like, for example, the Great Lakes, that's where Michigan is in this example. Ohio State's in the Midwest. They're not in the same division. I would assume there will be protected rivalries to make sure that every year Michigan and Ohio State are playing each other. So, like, I still think you can get the best of both worlds, where you can kind of go back to old school college football, where some of these intense rivalries now that have gone away because of conference realignment. I think now you can still keep those, while also, again, having it and making sure, like, you can kind of get to the modern day era of college football, where I think everything, you can get as much as you possibly can want. You get geographical rivalries. You still get teams playing on the same playing field. I think everyone's on the same board resource-wise. I'm not sure, to your point, how realistic it is, because I think you're spot on, unfortunately.
Zero.
It's going to take the Big Ten and the SEC to agree, and they make so much money. Why would they invite other conferences, other teams that do not make as much revenue as them, to basically split the revenue? But maybe, like, that's... Well, let me ask you this then. Let me put it this way. Take the Super Conference out for a second. If the Big Ten and the SEC are running college football, is that truly the best thing for the sport? Because to me, it does not sound like that.
Not for those of us that like college sports the way they were 15, 20, 30 years ago, but in an NIL and TV revenue world, I think it's what we're facing. I don't think there's any way to control it. I think it's all about maximizing revenue for these schools, and not just the schools, the conference, and the most important part, the student athletes, because now I use that term lightly these days, but now they are benefiting from the financial revenue. Rightfully so in many cases, but what happens to your swings, tennises, volleyballs, wrestlings of the world, right? It is about the cash cow. And yeah, that's just the nature of college sports these days. It's just what it is. That's what it's becoming. We can debate it till our face turns blue. What's best, what do we want to see? As fans, what we want to see is completely different, I think, than what conferences and commissioners and TV networks truly care about. Truly care about. The problem is, until we stop watching the product, it is never going to change. And no one's going to stop watching the product. And if you're a fan of those schools that bring in the high TV ratings and the big money, where most of your fans really are, why would you stop watching the product? Because your teams are fine. Your teams are benefit. There's one school that you always wonder what happens to them in this puzzle, and it's Notre Dame. They should have joined the Big Ten.
That I agree with. That it would be fun. So far, they seemingly are not paying any sort of financial penalty for that, and don't feel any need to anytime soon.
But they may feel a competitive. They may feel a competitive penalty in the near future. I think their seat at the table has lost power, even though it's not impacting them financially. That's
the last thing I'll say is I think you're spot on, and it's a sad reality, but it's a true reality.
Mm-hmm.
The folks that are running right now college football, the folks at the Big Ten, folks at the SEC, and then ESPN and Fox, the two biggest TV broadcasters, and paying them by far the most money for the rights for the Big Ten and SEC respectively, their visions of what is best for college football, and the fans, I would say everybody, no matter what team you root for, their vision of what's best for college football, it seems like we're living in two different worlds. And us as the fans, I don't, like you said, unless we stop watching, which that's not realistic to say, hey, if you're a USC fan, don't watch USC, boycott, watching your favorite team play every Saturday to get your point across. It's not going to happen. And so with them running college football, there's nothing we can do. And it seems like right now it's going down a path where it's about greed and money more than what's best for the overall health of the sport. That is really concerning and honestly really sad.
We're 25 minutes into our podcast today, and haven't even talked about a game. And it is October. It is October, and the conference season is fully underway. Is that an indictment on this week's matchups, or is that an indictment on the nature of college football, where it is a business, and with everything, all the moving parts, we're just trying to figure out where it is going next?
Yeah, I think, again, unfortunately, like you said, it's an indictment. And that's also, too, the reality of the last few years of everything going on with realignment, NIL. There has been equal, if not more, discussion of what's going on off the field compared to what's going on the field. Like you said, I mean, most of this podcast is going to probably be taken up by what's happening off the field in the future instead of, like you said, what's going on right now in week number 6 here as we do get set for a big weekend of Big Ten football. Before we get to games here, let me just throw one other thing by, but it's actually on the field.
Yep.
So we learned this week that Purdue fired their offensive coordinator in Graham Harrell. And right now, Purdue is seemingly, well, not seemingly, they're an absolute mess right now. But It's not just them, right? We talked about, UCLA's struggles, Northwestern struggles, and some of these schools right now that were kind of struggling before, but now with the addition of Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA are really kind of struggling to find their foothold here. I want to be the optimist for Purdue, for Northwestern, for USC, for UCLA, not USC, and maybe any other school that feels like right now they're in a spot of helplessness. Look at Indiana and look at Kirk Cignetti, specifically when it comes to hiring, right? Indiana, it's not exactly the most attractive job in the Big Ten, not exactly the most attractive job in the country, but why they're able to turn it around so fast is because they hired a head coach in Cignetti who was two things: experienced and a winner. And I think you're seeing now with Cignetti in Indiana, one of the biggest stories in college football, go to a bigger program, Alabama and Kalen DeBoer, why he's been able to hit the ground running. Cignetti and DeBoer, their two backgrounds are similar in the sense that they have been everywhere, and the one consistent has been that they've won everywhere. Whether it's Sioux Falls, Fresno State for Kalen DeBoer, whether it's IUP, whether it was Elon, JMU, and now Indiana, everywhere Cignetti's been, he's won. And I think right now, if you're Purdue and you're maybe not feeling great about Ryan Walters, and maybe Deshaun Foster right now, that experiment is going completely south. And maybe David Braun, after last year filling in at the last second for Pat Fitzgerald, now reality setting in of, oh, okay, is this the direction we're going to go here? I think when you look at what Indiana did and kind of going down to the group of 5 and looking for coaches that have not only done it for a while, but have won everywhere they've gone, I think that's where we can get the hope of we can turn this around quickly if we get the right guy. And I think you've seen part of the reason why I think these schools have kind of spun their wheels is kind of like the same thing. You go for the hotshot coordinator, or this guy had 1 or 2 years of success, but nothing sustained. I think if you are a fan right now that feels helpless, Trip, in the Big Ten in terms of where you're going, look at what Indiana did. Look at where they were. Look at where they are now and see, okay, this is the blueprint we should follow going forward here in terms of trying to get our program back on the track. I think it's experience and winning. Easier said than done, but I think that's a blueprint kind of for turning some of these programs around here. What do you think about that?
I think you need to wait a year or two down the road to really evaluate Indiana. Remember what Mel Tucker did at Michigan State?
True.
There is always a glow and an aura of excitement around a first-year coach. And transfers can greatly impact that success. Same thing happened at Michigan State. Look at the running back now in the NFL at the Seattle Seahawks. But I do believe in Kirk Cignetti. I think David Braun last year at Northwestern benefited from that first year wave as the new coach. Things weren't good at Northwestern. I still hesitate including him in the list because Northwestern, he was the Big Ten coach of the year last year. He inherited a disaster. They exceeded expectations. They're playing, while it looks cool, I think once they get their stadium and their facility, it will help in recruiting. And they are, they're small, they're private. How do they really fit? I hesitate to include them, but Purdue is a great example of you're trying to be successful, and where do you fit in the current era of college football? And I think the firing, which started this whole conversation, right? The firing of Graham Harrell, that's a panic move by Ryan Walters. And that's saying already, I'm on the hot seat. Because I don't think Graham Harrell's to blame for their offense. This is a guy who's been successful. He was successful as a player. His system works. He's been successful at other places. They only had 38 points in their losses to Oregon State, Nebraska, and Notre Dame. That's why they got rid of Graham Harrell. But they replaced him with Jason Simmons, right?
Mhm.
Jason Simmons, an offensive analyst to take over play calling duties. You replaced Graham Harrell, a well-known name in college football circles as a player and coach, with a man who has 1 year of college football coach. He was a high school coach. He coached the running backs at Miami of Ohio in 2023. That's it. That's his resume. That is a panic move for Purdue. So I agree with all your points. But to circle back to why did Purdue fire Graham Harrell? Because Ryan Walters is feeling the heat right now in West Lafayette.
I think part of that, right, can go to inexperience. First time as a head coach, still trying to figure it out. Like, I think when you're at a school that's really struggled to get a strong foothold, or even just look at in recent years for Purdue's history, when they've hired experienced coaches, they've had success. You've had Jeff Brom there who knows what he's doing and brought that cachet with him. Before that, you had Darrell Hazel, who that was a complete disaster. So I think it is like if you're a Purdue, for example, here going forward, and you really want to kind of dig out of the hole, and maybe you feel like Ryan Walters is not the answer, I think you have seen a difference of what an experienced coach brings and what an inexperienced coach brings. But like you said, it almost feels like from day one, they're trying to just save their job and just trying to get things going here. And it's like, if it doesn't kind of click early, it's, well, like I said, now I got to fire the OC, do all these panic moves. Sometimes that experience of, this is what I do well, I've been here before, we're not going to panic, this will get figured out, that can kind of help kind of steady the ship here. And so far, it does not seem like that ship is steady whatsoever.
One thing I want to add, because I know we want to get into our picks and do a deep dive, at least do a deep dive probably a little bit on Iowa and Ohio State this weekend. Ohio State, the first of what people feel like is at least a stretch of games where they will be able to evaluate. I don't know if they'll be pushed by some of these teams, but we'll be able to evaluate what Ohio State is. For our audience that's only listening to the pod, wherever you can get your podcasts, your graphic of sig break for this topic on our YouTube page is fantastic.
You like that? Good. Good.
That's good. So I don't want to drag this out any longer, and let's talk about Ohio State and Iowa. Come on.
That's too good.
Ohio State
with the segues today. Look at you.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's talk Ohio State and Iowa. Ohio State, something to prove is the question you posed to me. For me, I think they've been dominant. I think they're really good. Can they prove anything to me against Iowa? No, because they're going to win the football game. We have to wait till the Oregon and Penn State games coming up. But I think we can learn more about Will Howard as a quarterback against a good opponent. You posed the question, does Will Howard have the most pressure of any player in the Big Ten this week? I don't know that there's a lot of players that had pressure in the Big Ten this week if you look at the spreads. My thing with Howard is he simply can't lose a game for Ohio State this season. Even Ohio State and even the Oregon Ohio State game and the Penn State Ohio State game, I think Ohio State's so talented. And I don't mean this in a negative connotation. You know exactly what I'm about to say. If he can be a game manager, they're so good offensively with their run game, pass game, if their line holds up. He just can't turn the ball over. He did have 10 interceptions last year at Kansas State. 10 interceptions his first. He had 25 interceptions in 4 years at Kansas State. That Will Howard could be a negative reason that Ohio State have a negative impact on Ohio State results this year. So, yeah, he could hurt them, but I don't know that he'll ever have to win a game himself for them. Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't. That's kind of what I'm looking at in this game specifically, because you're right. Look, Iowa is good and they always have a hard-nosed defense, but Ohio State is so talented everywhere, offensively and defensively. Will Howard is not going to this game saying, fellas, get on my back. I got us. I'll make sure we go to victory here. That's not like the case, and I'm with you. But that's what I'm looking at in this game specifically is how to see two things. Number one, Iowa's run defense is really good. Now, Ohio State's run offense is elite. I would say right now they have the best running back duo with Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. Iowa's rush defense, even though they are right now fourth in the country, they've not gotten pushed the way I think they'll get pushed on Saturday. So I think Ohio State will be able to have success. Will it be easy? I don't think so. But if it is stuffed a little bit, if they're not ripping off 10 yards a run like they've been doing so far through the first few games of the season, first month of the season here. Can Will Howard, when everyone knows you're passing, can you still have success? Because Iowa's defense, we've talked to this in previous weeks here, it is not as sealed and locked down as it's been before. They've been leaky in the secondary. They already have allowed as many 50-yard plays or more this year through the first month of the season compared to what their season average is the last 7 years. So they have been prone to allowing a big play here or there, but they also still get interceptions. They have 5 picks so far in the year in 4 games. So I want to see how Will Howard plays, knowing you can get Iowa secondary, but also they are still a ball-hawking secondary. If the run game is not leading the way and as dominant so far as it's been in the first month of the season, how does Will Howard look? He doesn't have to play great in order to win this game, but I just, kind of to your point, I want to see when the expectation is just don't lose the game, how does he play?
I think they're 20-point favorites. It's a 3:30 game on CBS this week. I think it's going to be interesting to see how dominant Ohio State can be and what his role is in that dominance. Because I think we'll both agree, right? We'll make this our first game we pick too. Like, Ohio State's going to win. I think Ohio State covers. I don't think, McNamara beat Ohio State in 2021 when he was with Michigan. Caleb Johnson, their only hope is he continues to be explosive against Ohio State's defense. And I don't think Ohio State's going to allow Johnson's going to get yards, right? Even against a really stingy Ohio State defense that's third nationally in rush yards against this year. You can say, okay, they played no one. They played Michigan State last week, whatever. The big thing for Johnson, what's made him so successful and really has driven the Iowa offense, is he has 12 runs of 20 or more yards this season. He's not going to rip explosive runs, in my opinion, against that Ohio State. Remember 2 years ago, what was the complaint about Jim Knowles in his first season at Ohio State? Good defense, but man, they just let explosive plays pass run game all the time. Last year, they completely changed. They completely changed how they played defensively. No explosive plays. That Ohio State defense is back this year because Iowa doesn't have the passing game to do it. They have no chance. So that's kind of my synopsis on this matchup is, okay, how good can Ohio State be against a pretty good defense? And then can that defense eliminate explosive run plays? And if that happens, that spread of 20, that's an easy cover for the Buckeyes.
I agree. And I guess I'll maybe phrase what I'm watching here this way better. If I'm Phil Parker, Iowa's DC, I am loading the box. And I'm saying Trayvon Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, Chip Kelly, who wants to run the ball, you are not beating us in the run game here. And I would hope with my ball hawking secondary, I can get 1 or 2. Now, we've seen Jeremiah Smith, you put 3 guys on him, does not matter. You throw it in his area code, he'll come down with it 95% of the time. So leaving him on an island one-on-one, leaving Emeka Buka one-on-one, probably not a great idea. But I think if you're Iowa in this game, I think that's the only chance you have to win. And I think if that is the game plan we see on Saturday at the Shoe, I'm just interested to see how Will Howard, kind of your point, will he put the ball in harm's way? Will he create a turnover or 2 that allows all of a sudden Iowa back in this game? Or will he take what the defense gives him, make smart throws, and only put the ball where his guys can get it, and that's it? This is the first test. And again, with next week looming against Oregon, I am interested to see now against better competition how he does kind of fare, but I'm with you. Overall, game-wise, 20-point spread. I think Ohio State wins. I think they win comfortably. That Iowa offense is not going to score, even with how, I'm going to use air quotes, explosive and better they've been this season compared to previous years. I'm with you. Ohio State win and cover easily.
Speaking of Oregon, they have that coveted Friday night time slot this week in the Big Ten. Michigan State at number 8, Oregon, 23.5-point favorites at home, Friday, 9 o'clock on Fox. For me, this is Oregon continuing to grow. We've seen the strides they've made up front offensively and defensively in the trenches. Michigan State might get Nick Marsh back at full health for this entirety of this game, but Michigan State has turned the ball over. They definitely look better. This year, but they have, because of their turnovers and because of Oregon's improvement in the trenches, Michigan State, right? This isn't even a question of them going into Eugene and doing anything.
I'm with you. This is a dress rehearsal for Oregon. And the biggest thing I'm watching, like you said, with the passing game of Michigan State, it's been a lot better than it's been in a while. Aiden Childs, look, he gives the ball away, but also can make explosive plays. That's what I'm watching here. Can Michigan State exploit maybe an Oregon defense that could be leaky? Because again, you have that Ohio State team coming in next week. We saw early on Oregon struggled. It was more in the run game than the pass game, controlling their opposing offenses and allowing some big plays to happen. Can Michigan State get any chunk plays? If not, I think you got to feel pretty good with the Ducks defense truly turning things around and getting ready for next week. One thing really quickly.
Yeah, I want to add one thing too. Something real quick that I read, and it was from Graham Couch in the Lansing State Journal. Michigan State's offense, first 4 possessions against Ohio State, 7 plays, 55 yards, 5 for 64, 1 for 12. That was a touchdown, and 9 for 59. So there were some signs, even in that blowout against Ohio State, that they do have some momentum going offensively. We've seen that from Childs. Marshall was out for the Boston College game, started to come back, should be at better health this week. I think there are building blocks for them. Oregon's defense is good, but it's not the level of athleticism that Ohio State has at all 3 levels. So while I think Oregon wins with ease, this could be more of a 50-20 game as opposed to like a 31-6 type of game.
I like that. That was much more insightful than what I was about to say. I was going to say, did you see when Michigan State's equipment truck left? Tuesday morning. That just cracked me up. I feel like you're still kind of winding down from the weekend. And it's okay, load up the truck. We're going out west. I mean, if they're leaving on Tuesday to go to Oregon, when is Rutgers equipment truck leaving when they have to play USC on a Friday night here in a few weeks as well?
Well, I don't know if I'm allowed to. Penn State's equipment truck will leave Sunday to go to USC for next week. Because Penn State arrives Thursday in
they're going
California.
2 days ahead.
An extra day early. James Franklin talked about that this week. So they'll fly out of Harrisburg Thursday to go across country to USC, be there Thursday, practice Friday. And the equipment truck has to be there when the team gets there. So it leaves Sunday, the day after UCLA at Penn State. Oh, wow. What another transition. UCLA at Penn State 27.5-point favorites at home. And for me, this is all about Penn State's defensive line against UCLA's offensive line. UCLA's offensive line allowed 5 sacks. They got Ethan Garbers hurt last week. There's a question who'll even play in this game, the UCLA quarterback. If he doesn't go, Justin Martin will go. 4-star sophomore. He would replace him. It's UCLA's first Big Ten road game, their first meeting with Penn State since 1968. Penn State's D-line was dominant against Illinois. They'll be dominant again against UCLA. And I just think this is a tough first road game in the Big Ten for UCLA coming across the country. Everyone, Fox Big Noon, first week of October, stripe out in Happy Valley. And when you got Penn State playing Illinois at night the week before and USC the week after on the road, if this is about Penn State showing up.
Are you concerned about that at all? We did see against Bowling Green after that West Virginia game. It was a very sloppy first half, and they seemed, I don't want to say not checked out and not focused, but that's at least what it seemed like. Defensively, especially, they allowed a bunch of big plays. Mm-hmm. Is there any concern of a letdown here, of a classic sandwich, come down off that game, look ahead to USC? Nervous at all?
I would say no, because I think James Franklin has taken that head on this week. You could kind of gauge that through his comments about need to improve every week, need to get better every week. I'm sure it's something that's been stressed. I know it's been stressed this week. And it is still UCLA. There's a uniqueness to it. It's not a Bowling Green. It is still the name brand of UCLA. Granted, they've really struggled. I think when you put the tape on too, they rank 130, 132nd, 133rd. That's not where you want to rank in a lot of categories, offensively and defensively. They've got no run game. They have no pass defense. If you really want to dig deep in the numbers, like when you're trying to find something, say you're broadcasting the game and you're trying to find something to talk about pregame, Penn State, an area of struggle last year for their offense, was on third downs. This year, they're 51% on third downs. So that's a great improvement for them to go along with the explosive plays. They cleaned up the 2 areas that plagued them most last year offensively. UCLA opponents are averaging 58% per game on third down conversions against this year.
Wow.
I mean, it's not fun, but yeah, UCLA is the worst team in the Big Ten. They're fortunate to have a win at Hawaii. They may not win a game this year in the Big Ten. It is very realistic. They may not win a game this year in the Big Ten.
Let's
As
see.
we
I would
transition to Purdue at Wisconsin, speaking of teams that are at the bottom, no.
yeah. That's looking at UCLA schedule. That ain't pretty whatsoever here. That's how about was Purdue here? They get any juice? Any sort of I mean, talk about Grant Howell before the replacement. Any sort of life? Because we have seen in college football before, and maybe more with the head coach firing. But like that first game, you get a little extra juice. Anything here you expecting from Purdue, or is it Wisconsin rolling?
I'm just curious what Jason Simmons, with that lack of experience, what that means for them. I look at this game not so much about Purdue because I think their season trajectory is cemented at this point. But Wisconsin at home against a team that's one of the worst two or three teams in the Big Ten. It's been a tough year for Luke Fickell. This is a must, like, this is a must win for Wisconsin just for the overall direction of their program. That's my biggest thing with this game.
I agree with that. I'm with you. Like, do they have the most? Yes, like in terms of, I was gonna say the most pressure. Like we can get into that. What it means differently. Does Ohio State have to win against Iowa? Obviously they do. Like I'm with you. Like in the sense of like not the marquee games, but you just look at needing to get kind of some pressure off you and just kind of quiet the crowd. I'm with you. Wisconsin, you got to win here and win handily. They're 14-point favorites at home. 11 a.m. local kick, which sleepy, maybe coming off of that USC loss, maybe not a lot of juice. Like you said, Purdue, one of the worst teams in the conference coming in. Oh, it's a layup. We'll have an easy one here. This is where I think if you're Luke Fickell, you really kind of see how the locker room responds to you. Can you come out fast? Can you come out aggressive? Can you put Purdue out of their misery early? If you let a bad team hang around, they hung around last week against Nebraska. They didn't pay the price for Nebraska, pulled away late, but yeah, let a bad team hang around. They could get you, and that would, like you said, be a devastating loss for Luke Fickell in this one.
Northwestern is 6-0 after a loss under David Braun. Great stat that you found. Indiana, 14-point favorites on the road in Evanston. Obviously, they have a tough slate coming up. Any worry about the Hoosiers here? For me, no. But for you, any worry about the Hoosiers here?
No, I'm with you. I think Kirk Cignetti has not only got this team focused, they're playing hard, and they are doing what good teams do. They are taking bad teams to the woodshed each and every week. And I don't think there will be a letdown here. Again, you can talk about the practice facility and the setting, but I think because this is so new for Indiana, that they've not had this success before. I know there's a bunch of transfers, so it's not like they've seen recent history of Indiana losing. But I think because you still have that buy-in, you're riding high. Now you're ranked as well for the first time since 2021. Having that number next to him, I think, is huge. No. And you look at Northwestern here, their offense is one of the worst in all the
They
conference.
have no chance to keep up.
Country.
Yeah.
Right.
What, 16 points per game? They have no chance to keep up with Indiana.
No. And we saw last week, Northwestern has a better defense than Maryland, but we saw even last week, you lose the turnover battle 0-4 and you hang 42 points. So it's like, it's the classic cliche of, oh, well, if Northwestern produces a turnover to keep the game close, they turned it over 4 times last week and still put a 40 spot on the board. I think there's no chance here for Northwestern. I think Indiana rolls, covers easily on the road.
I'm going to mix the order up on you here because I think the other two games are more interesting. UCLA ranked 11th on the road. Minnesota, 8-point favorites. Night game on BTN. We'll get to the other two games. I think they're actually interesting. USC, right? Nothing. Miller Moss. There's no way Max Brosmer in Minnesota can keep up with the Trojans, even though they're playing them at home.
Yes, I agree. I think USC wins this game here. But the thing I'm watching in this game is turnovers. We talked about it the last few weeks here. It bit USC against Michigan 2 weeks ago. They did not bite them last week against Wisconsin. But with Penn State coming to town, I do like if we're talking about now a third straight game, even if you win and win handily against Minnesota, where Miller Moss has another interception or two, even with how well he's throwing the football, those giveaways, I think against better teams will come back to bite you. I still don't even think if you turn the ball over a bunch that it'll be enough for Minnesota to win this game. But I think for me, what I'm watching is kind of more like what we talked about, the Oregon and Michigan State, and even in a way, Ohio State, Iowa. This is all a dress rehearsal for a big game next weekend. How do you look kind of getting ready for that big one here? For me, it's turnovers with USC. How about you? Anything you're concerned about?
No, I agree with you. I think turnovers have been a problem. I just think they have too many weapons where they can stretch the field horizontally and vertically for Minnesota to contend with that. And they've also had balance offensively. The running game still has been there enough for USC. I think they'll score too many points for Minnesota to keep up with. The two games left are the two games the experts, quote unquote, experts feel like will be the two closest in the Big Ten this weekend. Rutgers at Nebraska, 7-point underdogs, unbeaten Rutgers on the road, and 10th ranked Michigan at Washington, also going on the road is that right? As dogs here? Michigan's a dog in
How
this game?
how about that?
At
The
the dogs
Huskies,
or
the
dog at the
dogs
dog?
are not the home dogs. Now, let's save that one
Wow.
for last because that's fascinating.
Okay. Yep.
But Rutgers, Nebraska here. I think we talked about this. This is a great test for both teams here. I think Rutgers wins this game on the road, in part
Yep.
because Nebraska, at least the last big game they played 2 weeks ago against Illinois, what kind of got them late in that game? Sacks by Dylan Raiola trying to do too much in overtime, missed throw that should have been a touchdown that could have won the game for you, and field goal kicking. And that is right now a huge problem for the Cornhuskers, where Tristan Alvano, it doesn't look like to me he's going to play on Saturday. And we've seen his replacement, John Hull. He missed a big, what could have been the game-winning field goal 2 weeks ago against Illinois. Had 2 field goals blocked, 0 of 3 on the day against Purdue last week. And that first half, you want to talk about classic Big Ten football, setting football back. Wowza, that was a doozy. But like for 3 quarters, you watched Nebraska's offense against one of the worst teams in the country in Purdue, and they were sputtering. They couldn't get anything going here. So the last 2 weeks, I don't know if it's Raiola hitting a freshman wall. Maybe now the tape is out on him a little bit. So trying to, again, with that true freshman, trying to get maybe some of that trying to get more consistent as the season goes on here. But the state of Nebraska's offense right now concerns me. Their field goal kicking is a major concern in what should be a close game. And you see on the other side with Rutgers, they have been able to pound the rock with Kyle Monungai, third in all the country in terms of average rushing yards per game at 147. I think they'll be able to run the ball, clock control, kind of take Nebraska's crowd out of it. Give me Rutgers on the road.
Yeah, I like Rutgers too for a lot of the reasons you mentioned. I don't think they'll turn the ball over. I think they'll play a clean game. Both these teams have kind of been through a test before, so I think you throw out that lack of a test, road environment type of thing for Rutgers. And for Dylan Raiola, it's okay. You had the experience of playing a ranked Illinois team, now ranked Illinois team at night at home. Can you show me that you learned from your big mistakes down the stretch in that game? If Nebraska had proven to have a better run game to this point, I would say, you know what, there might be something there. A Greg Schiano team, stout defense, physical, you think you can't run against them. Rutgers is allowing 173 yards rushing per game this year and is averaging 6 yards per carry against. But I think to place this game on Dylan Raiola, I don't know that Nebraska has enough of a running game to offset that. I think Rutgers wins the game, to your point, by what they've done really well so far this season. And that's limit mistakes, move the football, pound it on the ground, and utilize the diversity of their passing game. And that's throwing to big receivers, a big tight end. Yeah, I do. I can't believe Nebraska is a 7-point favorite. I do think Rutgers goes on the road and stays unbeaten with a win.
How about that? We talked about on Monday's pod. For me, to believe, I know you're in on Rutgers. For me to kind of believe they're truly a contender here, go on the road and win at Nebraska. I think we
by
could
far
be
their
talking
toughest game. Yeah, they've had
obviously
hosting Washington's tough. Going on the road to Virginia Tech is tough. But this one, if they can get through those 3, that's an impressive slate for Greg Schiano. That's nicely done. 10th
with
ranked Michigan
Wisconsin
at
and
Washington.
UCLA at home too. The next 2 games before you go at USC. Looking good there. Looking good. Final game. Like you said, this is the spread by far I'm the most surprised about. Michigan 2.5-point dogs on the road at Washington. Now, 2 things here. It's a 7:30 Eastern NBC kick, so it is not Pac-12 after dark. And obviously, number 2, it's now in the Big Ten. No, even Big Ten after dark here. How you feel about this game? Are you kind of buying Vegas as, you know what? Yeah, I kind of like Washington. You'll take them. What are your thoughts on this one?
They're looking at Rogers in the passing game against the Michigan defense that's been susceptible to pass. Now, it sounds like Will Johnson will be available, I believe, for Michigan in this game. That certainly strengthens their pass defense. But on the road, having a one-dimensional offense, if Washington was a running team, I'd feel fine about Michigan. They're good up front on defense. It's a defense with 3 first-round picks on it. Michigan might have 4 first-round picks on their team, and they're underdogs on the road at Washington. But I think because of Rodgers and the pass offense, the diversity of weapons that he has, and Jed Fish is going to play good defense against the run, I think it's a bad matchup for Michigan. And I do like Washington at home. I just think it's a bad matchup for me. They don't match up well with Washington. I like Washington.
I'm with you. I'm with you actually because it really is a battle of the weaknesses, right? Like you said,
Yeah.
Michigan's pass defense is a big weakness against the strength that is the passing offense of Washington. On the flip side, Washington's defense is solid, right? But they are, at least in terms of the country, they are 51st in terms of rushing defense. They're allowing 122 yards per game on the ground. And Michigan's going to at least try to pound the rock. So it's not like they've been impenetrable. And we saw Kyle Monangai last week when Washington visited Rutgers. He had a really good game on the ground. But with that said, I think I trust a lot more Washington's run defense than I do Michigan's pass defense. So I'm with you. Road environment it will be a hostile crowd there for Washington for sure. With Michigan coming to town, give me the Huskies at home covering the 2.5. I'm with you. I like that game a lot for the Huskies. I think it's a good spot for them.
When we started this podcast, I never thought we would agree as much as we do. But if there's one thing to agree on, I think that was our best episode.
I agree. That was fun. Despite the fact that, we talked about the chaotic state of college football for the first half of it, and maybe the future is not looking great, but hey,
bleak.
We rebounded.
Yeah, it's bleak. To tie it all back, one last smooth transition. It's as bleak as Lauren's future with you. Anyway, so that is thanks for tuning in to the Still Enrolled podcast. You can make sure you like and subscribe to our podcast wherever you do choose to listen to such podcasts, and also subscribe to our YouTube page if you'd like to take the video version of this podcast in as well. It's one man with no hair and another man who uses too much product in his hair.
Yo, this is just water.
I'm
getting a haircut after the show.
There's the shot.
Look at that. Look at that, baby.
Why don't you close it again? It feels more natural when you wrap the podcast up.
Tripp said it all. Like a comedian, he has just dropped the mic. He's exited stage left. I got nothing else to say outside of enjoy the games this week, and we'll be back on Monday to break it all down. So make sure, as we get ready for big week 7, you tune in to the Still Enrolled podcast. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you Monday.